Do you think your Filipina girlfriend is different? That your love is real and your story won't end like all the other fools you see online? I used to think that too, and that certainty cost me every cent I had saved in my 73 years of life. My name is Norman Green, and I am the ghost haunting my own past. I'm not speaking to you from a seaside villa in Cebu. I'm speaking to you from a place of total ruin. I lost everything. The dream you're probably chasing right now, the low cost paradise, the younger loving partner, the respect you feel you lost back home. I had all of it within reach, but it was a mirage, and I walked straight toward it. It led me directly to the edge of the abyss. You don't lose your life savings all at once. It's not a single grand scam. It's a slow, methodical bleed, a death by a thousand cuts, where each wound is disguised as an act of love or a family emergency. It starts small: a sick mother, a typhoon damaged roof, unpaid tuition. Before you know it, you're funding a quote unquote joint business that never makes a profit and building a house on land you can never legally own. I am the living result of what happens when you play a high stakes game without knowing the rules. My story is a roadmap of financial ruin, and I'm laying it out for you, not for sympathy, but as a dire warning before you follow my footsteps. Before the Philippines, my life was a long gray hallway. For 5 years since my wife Martha passed, I'd been living in what I can only describe as a waiting room for death. The house we'd filled with laughter and arguments for 40 years had become a silent museum of a life I no longer lived. Every morning I'd wake up, make 1 cup of coffee instead of two, and drive to a job in logistics where I was less a person and more a piece of aging office furniture. I was invisible there, just as I was invisible in my own neighborhood. The world was loud and in color, but I was trapped in a silent black and white film. The loneliness was a physical weight. My only daughter, Sarah, and I hadn't really spoken since the funeral. We had a bitter fight, something about me not selling the house fast enough, and the space between us grew into a frozen ocean. A text on my birthday, a generic card at Christmas, that was the extent of our relationship. I was a loose end she didn't know how to tie up. So I spent my evenings with the television, the noise a poor substitute for conversation. I'd eat frozen dinners over the sink, staring out at the vibrant lives of my neighbors, feeling like a ghost watching the world through a window. My job was the anchor that kept me tethered to this bleak reality. 43 years I'd given that company, and in the end, I was just the old guy in the corner cubicle who knew how the legacy systems worked. Younger, sharper people with expensive degrees would talk over me in meetings, their ambition a constant reminder of my own obsolescence. They didn't see a man with a lifetime of experience. They saw a relic, a bottleneck, a guy who was taking up a parking spot. I wasn't contributing anymore. I was just lingering. Each day was a quiet humiliation, a slow erosion of the pride I once had in my work. Weekends were the cruelest. That's when the silence of the house was at its most profound. I would see families in the park, hear the sounds of children's laughter over the fence, and the void inside me would ache with an unbearable sharpness. I was a man with no purpose. My wife was gone. My daughter was a stranger, and my career was a ghost. I wasn't living. I was simply running out the clock. There was nothing to look forward to, no color on the horizon, just more of the same gray, stretching out until the inevitable end. I felt utterly and completely alone, a forgotten man in a world that had moved on without me. Then one night, lost in the blue glow of my computer screen, a video popped up. It was titled, "Find Your Paradise: Why Western Men Are Retiring to the Philippines." I clicked, and there it was: dazzling beaches, vibrant markets, and smiling, beautiful women who looked at men my age with a kind of reverence I hadn't seen in decades. An article talked about the low cost of living, the respect for elders. A tiny, dangerous spark ignited in the gray emptiness of my soul. It was the first flicker of hope I'd felt in years. What if there was a place where I wasn't invisible? What if there was a second act waiting for me, somewhere far away from this waiting room? That single video became a gateway. For the next few weeks, my evenings were no longer spent in the gray fog of television static, but in the vibrant, saturated colors of the Philippines. I devoured everything I could find: expat vlogs, travel guides, cost of living breakdowns. I saw men my age, paunchy and balding, beaming next to women who looked at them with genuine affection. They weren't invisible, they were respected patriarchs. They weren't eating frozen dinners, they were enjoying fresh mangoes on the beach. It was a world away from my silent house and my thankless job. This wasn't just a place, it was an antidote to my entire life, an oasis shimmering in the vast desert of my loneliness. My research quickly narrowed to one place: Cebu. It seemed to have everything: the convenience of a city, the beauty of nearby beaches, and a large, established community of foreigners who had already paved the way. I joined online forums where men shared spreadsheets detailing their monthly expenses: a few hundred for rent, a few dollars for a delicious meal. It was intoxicating. My modest pension, which barely kept me afloat in America, could provide a life of comfort, even luxury, in Cebu. I started to see my life savings not as a dwindling resource to be hoarded for a grim old age, but as a golden key that could unlock this paradise. The logic felt irrefutable, but it was never just about the money. The articles and videos all spoke of a culture that revered its elders. They described a society where family was paramount, and older people were looked to for wisdom, not pushed aside for being slow. I would watch these American and European men, older than me even, sitting at the head of a table, surrounded by a smiling Filipino family. They weren't just tolerated, they were celebrated. The thought of that, after years of being talked over in meetings and ignored in my own neighborhood, was a powerful lure. It was a promise of regaining the dignity that time had stolen from me. The final piece of the puzzle was companionship. I was done being alone. After weeks of lurking, I finally worked up the courage to sign up for an online dating site that specialized in connecting Western men with Filipinas. My hands trembled as I filled out the profile, selecting photos where I thought I looked distinguished rather than just old. It felt both pathetic and thrilling, like a teenager asking a girl to dance for the first time. But the dream of Cebu was so powerful now, so fully formed in my mind, that this felt like the last crucial step to making it real. I wasn't just looking for a partner, I was auditioning the co star for my new life. I scrolled through hundreds of profiles, the faces blurring together. Many were impossibly young, their messages feeling like generic copy and paste templates. I was about to give up for the night when her profile appeared. Angelica, 34. Her smile wasn't a performance. It felt warm, genuine. Her profile didn't talk about wanting a good man to save her, but about her love for her family, her job as a clerk, and her dream of one day opening a small bake shop. She seemed real, grounded. I must have read her bio 10 times before my fingers, shaking slightly, moved to the keyboard. I took a deep breath and wrote the first words of my new chapter. The first message I received from Angelica was different. It wasn't a canned, one-line compliment. She asked about my day, about the kind of music I liked, about what it was like to grow up in a place where the seasons changed. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was genuinely curious about me, Norman Green, not just my pension or my passport. Our chats became the bookends of my day. The first thing I'd check in the morning, and the last thing I'd see before falling into a hopeful sleep. The screen wasn't a barrier, it was a portal to a world where I was wanted. After weeks of daily video calls, where I saw her humble home and met her smiling mother on screen, the need to see her in person became a physical ache. It was beyond a simple desire. It felt like a biological imperative, a homing instinct pulling me across the globe. I booked the flight to Cebu in a fugue state of terror and joy, my fingers trembling as I entered my credit card information. I told my neighbors and the few people at work who still talked to me that I was just taking a long vacation. But I knew in my bones this wasn't a holiday. I was flying to meet my destiny. The moment I walked through customs at Matan Cebu International Airport and saw her, every fear I had dissolved in the humid air. She held a small, hand-drawn sign with my name on it, and her smile was so radiant it felt like the sun had come indoors just for me. She was smaller, more delicate than she appeared on camera, but her hug was strong and certain. It wasn't the polite embrace of a stranger, it was the hug of someone who had been waiting for you. The kind of hug that says, "You're finally here, you're safe." I was a 73-year-old man, and I felt like a soldier coming home from war. Angelica became my entire world. She guided me through the chaotic symphony of the city, her hand always finding mine, a small anchor in the vibrant storm. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just an old man shuffling through a crowd. I was with someone. I was part of a pair. I was visible. The simple act of her holding my hand in public was a profound validation, a public declaration that I was worthy of affection, of youth, of this beautiful woman's attention. Every meal we shared, every sunset we watched, stripped away another layer of the gray, invisible man I had become back home. I dreaded meeting her family, bracing myself for the cold suspicion or worse, the barely concealed financial appraisal. Instead, I was welcomed into their small, bustling home like a long lost patriarch. They called me Sir Norman or Kuya Norman, a term of respect, and deferred to me in a way that was both humbling and intoxicating. I was given the best seat, the first plate, the last piece of roasted chicken. I saw the way they looked at Angelica and then at me, and I understood that by being with her, I had given her status. I wasn't just a visitor, I was their benefactor, their honored guest, and the feeling was dangerously seductive. Every day I spent with Angelica, I felt the calendar of my own life rewind. The chronic ache in my back seemed to disappear. The heavy weariness in my soul was replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt since I was a young man. I swam in the turquoise water, letting the salt sting my skin, and felt reborn. She would laugh at my clumsy attempts to eat street food, and her laughter was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I wasn't just observing life anymore, I was living it ravenously. The man who ate frozen dinners over the sink was a distant memory, a ghost from another life. My life had become a flawless film, a romance written and directed by a benevolent God. There was a scene where we rode on the back of a scooter through lush green hills, the wind in our hair. There was a scene where she sang to me in a low, soft voice in a karaoke bar, her eyes locked on mine. There was the montage of walks on the beach, of shared plates of garlic rice, of quiet afternoons where we just sit in comfortable silence, her head on my shoulder. It was a highlight reel of a perfect life, and I couldn't believe I was the star. It was the quiet moments of devotion that truly broke down my defenses. It was the way she'd fan me with a piece of cardboard when the heat became too much, the way she'd peel a mango for me and hand me the choicest slices, the way she'd shoo the children away so I could have a nap. These were not the grand performative gestures of a scammer. They were the tender, intimate acts of a woman in love. Each small act of service was a thread weaving itself into the fabric of my reality, creating a tapestry so beautiful and so convincing that I never thought to question its integrity. I believed I was in complete control. I was the one with the retirement fund, the American passport, the power. When I suggested we spend a weekend at a resort in Moal Boal, she would clap her hands in delight and pack our bags. When I decided to treat her entire family to a lavish dinner, I saw myself as a magnanimous provider, a king bestowing gifts upon his loyal subjects. I mistook her compliance for devotion. I was the producer of this grand love story, funding every beautiful scene, never realizing I was just an actor reading my lines from a script that had been written long before I arrived. One evening, she told me a story, her voice thick with sadness, about how her mother's dentures were broken and how she was in constant pain, unable to eat properly. There was no request, just a daughter's sorrow. The next morning, I went to the ATM and withdrew the cash. When I gave it to her, she burst into tears, hugging me so tightly I could feel her heart beating. "You are my hero, Norman," she whispered. The feeling that surged through me was worth 10 times what I'd given her. I wasn't just a boyfriend. I was a savior. I had eased her suffering. It was the best, purest money I had ever spent. My original flight was scheduled for 2 weeks after I arrived. I pushed it back a month, then another. The thought of returning to my empty house, to the silence and the invisibility, was a physical torment. Here, I was the sun around which a loving planet revolved. Every morning I woke up next to her was a confirmation that I had found my purpose. I was needed, I was loved, I was revered. Why would any man in his right mind trade this paradise for the gray purgatory that waited for him back home? I wasn't just extending a vacation, I was refusing to leave heaven. Looking back, the entire experience was too perfect, too seamless. Our life together was a meticulously crafted narrative, a movie where every scene was designed to evoke maximum romantic impact. From the shared laughter over a cheap beer to the quiet reverence with which she'd listened to my old stories, it was all flawless. I had found the antidote to loneliness, a love so profound it felt like a miracle. It was a beautiful, intricate screenplay, and I was so captivated by my role as the romantic lead that I failed to notice the entire set was being built with my life savings. I should have seen that the dream was too good to be true, but I was a man dying of thirst, and I didn't want to believe the oasis was a mirage. The first sign that the tide was turning came subtly, wrapped in the guise of masculine duty. Angelica approached me one evening, her brow furrowed with a worry that felt practiced yet was utterly effective. Her brother, who used his motorcycle for a small delivery business, had crashed. He was fine, but the bike was a wreck, and without it, the family's already meager income would shrink further. She never asked for money directly. She simply presented the problem, a damsel in distress laying out the dragon's path. I saw it not as a demand, but as a test I was meant to pass. A few $100s to be the hero? It was a bargain. I paid for the repair, feeling a surge of pride as I solved their crisis with a casual wave of my financial hand. My reservoir was vast. This was merely a cup of water offered to the thirsty. A week later, another small fissure appeared in the dam. Angelica's cousin, a bright-eyed girl of 10, was in danger of being sent home from school. She needed new textbooks and a specific uniform her mother couldn't afford. Angelica told me the story with a heavy heart, lamenting her own truncated education and projecting her dreams onto the next generation. Denying this felt like denying a child a future. So I opened my wallet again. It wasn't a cost. It was an investment in potential, a noble act. I was the benevolent patriarch, securing the family's upward mobility. This justification felt clean, righteous, and I clung to it as I handed over the cash. The requests began to form a rhythm, a soft but persistent drumbeat of need. The next one involved her mother's health. The new dentures were a success, but now she was suffering from dizzy spells. Angelica spoke in hushed, fearful tones about a potential heart problem, mentioning a private clinic in the city that could offer a proper diagnosis. The cost was more than the bike repair or the school books, but the emotional stakes were infinitely higher. How could I, a man who had spent a fortune on his own late wife's medical care, deny this woman a simple consultation? It would have been monstrous. I paid telling myself that this was what a good partner did. You showed up when health was on the line. I was proving my worth not just as a provider, but as a caring, reliable man. Then came a crisis that felt different, more communal. A typhoon brushed the coast, and while it wasn't a direct hit, the wind and rain were enough to peel back a section of the family's rusted tin roof. Angelica showed me pictures of the damage, buckets catching muddy water, clothes and bedding soaked through. This wasn't a personal failing or a lack of planning. This was an act of God, an external enemy we could face together. It was an opportunity to move from me to we. I withdrew a larger amount this time, enough to replace the entire roof. I wasn't just patching a leak, I was fortifying our home, building a shelter against the storms of the world. Each peso I spent felt like a brick in the foundation of our shared life. After the roof was fixed, my status as quote unquote hero was cemented, but the fissures were connecting beneath the surface, weakening the whole structure of my finances. A new recurring drain began when Angelica's father was laid off from his security job. He was an older man with no other skills, and his small income vanished overnight. Angelica explained that in their culture, the duty to support him fell to the children. Since she was with me, that duty extended to me. It began as a monthly allowance, a sum that seemed small in isolation, but represented a permanent leak in my reservoir. I rationalized it as cultural immersion. I was embracing her family's values, becoming one of them. The anxiety this caused was a low hum, easily drowned out by the chorus of their gratitude. My role was subtly but irrevocably changing. I was no longer the honored guest. I was the system administrator, the man responsible for keeping the entire family network online. When a cousin got into some trouble with the law over a drunken brawl and needed to pay a fine to a local official to make it disappear, the request was routed through Angelica to me. This felt grimy, transactional, but she framed it as a matter of saving a young man's future and avoiding a public shame that would tarnish the family's name, our name. Refusing felt like an act of social arson, so I paid, telling myself I was a diplomat, preserving the delicate peace of our shared lives. But the defensive tone of my own inner monologue was becoming undeniable. The emergencies were becoming less about survival and more about lifestyle maintenance. The family's ancient television, the centerpiece of their small living room, finally gave out. Angelica described the silent, joyless evenings, the disappointed faces of the children. A new television wasn't medicine or a roof, but in their world, it was a vital link to the outside, a source of communal joy. I resisted for a day, the tightening in my chest a new and unwelcome sensation. But her quiet sadness was a more powerful tool than any argument. I bought the television, my justification now sounding thin even to myself. I was simply providing a basic standard of living that I, as her partner, should be happy to offer. A few weeks later, a request arrived that represented a significant escalation. It was another brother who saw the success of the one with the repaired motorcycle and now had a grander vision. He had the opportunity to work in Dubai, a life-changing prospect that promised a much higher salary. However, there were substantial fees for an agency, for medical certifications, and for his flight. The total was more than all the previous requests combined. "He will pay you back, Norman, with interest," Angelica swore, her eyes shining with the reflected light of the Arabian dream. "This is an investment in our future. It will lift us all up." The word investment was the hook, and I was ready to bite. I paid the fees for her brother's Dubai dream, and in doing so, I felt I had graduated from simple problem solver to a genuine patron of the family's future. The gratitude was intoxicating, a wave that washed away my immediate financial concerns. But the investment never paid off. His salary was less than promised. His own expenses were higher than expected, and the promised repayments never materialized. The fissure this created in my reservoir was deep and wide. I started telling myself that not all investments work out. You have to take risks to get rewards. It was the defensive language of a gambler, not a planner, and a part of me knew it. My bank balance, once a source of comfort and power, was now a source of constant, nagging anxiety. The mighty lake of my retirement savings had receded, leaving a shoreline of exposed fears. I found myself checking it multiple times a day, as if staring at the number could somehow make it go back up. Angelica, with her keen emotional intelligence, sensed my growing unease. Her affection became more pronounced, her physical tenderness more deliberate. If I was quiet for too long, she would bring me my favorite snack or gently massage my shoulders, her touch a temporary anesthetic for the gnawing worry in my gut. The cascade of needs began to blur into a single, unending demand. A nephew needed a new suit for a wedding. An aunt required a specific expensive medicine. A small ancestral piece of land required a payment to settle a dispute with a neighbor. Each request was packaged in its own dramatic emotional narrative, and each was just small enough that refusing felt petty and cruel. I was no longer making conscious decisions. I was in damage control mode, desperately trying to plug the endless leaks in a dam that was groaning under the pressure, the sound of its eventual collapse growing louder every day. The moment that shifted everything, when the web of small cracks finally gave way to a catastrophic fracture, arrived disguised as our ultimate dream. Angelica approached me, her face a mask of nervous excitement. She explained that she was tired of her menial job and wanted to build something of her own. She brought up her old dream, the one from her dating profile, opening a small bake shop. "Not my business, Norman," she said, taking my hands in hers. "Our business." It was a masterstroke. This wasn't another handout. This was a foundation for our future, a tangible symbol of our partnership. But as she laid out her beautiful, heartfelt vision, I didn't see a business plan. I saw the most dangerous justification of them all, the one that would require me to drain the reservoir completely. The bake shop idea took root in my mind and grew into an obsession, a beautiful leafy tree that blocked out the desolate landscape of my dwindling bank account. This was the answer to everything. It wasn't another handout, another emergency patch on a leaking roof. It was a foundation. Our business, she had said, and those two words were the most potent justification I had ever heard. This venture would generate its own income, making us self-sufficient and ending the constant humiliating trickle of withdrawals. I saw myself as a shrewd entrepreneur, a man co-founding a legacy with his partner, not a fool being bled dry. Angelica, with a knack for timing that I mistook for providence, had already found the perfect location. It was a small, dusty plot of land on a corner with good foot traffic not far from the local church. She spoke of it with a reverence usually reserved for holy ground. It belonged to her uncle, who, out of love for her, was willing to sell it to us for a family price. The idea of owning a piece of this paradise, of driving a stake into the ground and declaring it my home, was intoxicating. It was the ultimate remedy for the rootless, invisible life I had left behind. Of course, there was the predictable, well-documented hitch. As a foreigner, I couldn't legally own the land. Angelica explained this with a soft, almost apologetic sadness, as if it were a flaw in the universe she wished she could fix for me. Then she delivered the masterstroke. "It has to be in my name, Norman," she said, her eyes welling with earnest tears. "It's the only way. You have to trust me. This is the final step to prove we are truly one." It wasn't a legal transaction she was proposing. It was a sacrament, the ultimate test of faith. I felt a surge of defiant pride. I wasn't one of those gullible old fools from the YouTube comments. My situation was different. My love was real. Angelica wasn't a predator. She was my devoted partner. This wasn't me being conned. This was me smashing the final barrier between us, demonstrating a level of trust so absolute it transcended petty laws. This was our leap of faith, and I was determined to prove my courage. I was building a monument to our love, and her name on the deed would be the cornerstone. The warnings I'd once read online now seemed like the bitter ramblings of jaded, unlucky men. The total cost was a breathtaking figure. The land, the construction of the bake shop, and a small two-bedroom apartment for us on the second floor would consume nearly 80% of what was left of my retirement savings. For a full day, a cold, metallic fear lodged itself in my throat. I barely spoke, the number echoing in my head like a death knell. But Angelica's quiet, unwavering belief in our dream was the antidote to my panic. She sketched out plans on napkins, described the taste of the pastries we would sell, and talked about the children we would help with our success. I sat in front of my laptop at the small wooden desk in our rented room, the online banking portal glowing in the dim light. The wire transfer form was filled out. The beneficiary name was hers, Angelica Reyes. The amount was a number that represented 43 years of my life, distilled into a cold, hard figure. I pictured her face, the way she smiled when she called me her hero. This wasn't losing money. It was purchasing a future, a final, beautiful act. My hand trembled as I moved the mouse, the cursor hovering over the confirmation button. I took one last deep breath and clicked. For a week after the transfer, I walked on air. The wire transfer wasn't an expense, it was an exorcism, casting out the ghosts of loneliness and fear that had haunted me for years. Angelica was ecstatic, her joy a radiant sun that burned away any lingering shadows of doubt in my mind. She hugged me, cried, and called me her king. We were finally building our castle. Every morning I would wake up and ask her, "Is today the day? Does the work begin?" She would just smile, kiss my forehead, and say, "Soon, my love, very soon. These things take time." And I believed her, because I had invested everything I had into that belief. But soon became a week, and then two. The corner plot remained a dusty, empty lot. My questions became more frequent, tinged with an anxiety I couldn't hide. Angelica's excuses were always ready, always plausible. The land title needed another signature. The city required a new permit. The only available contractor had a family emergency. Each excuse was a small, reasonable delay. But together they formed a wall of procrastination that my logic couldn't breach. The euphoria of the transfer had completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, heavy dread of a man who suspects he is waiting for a train that will never arrive. The number in my own bank account, now a pathetic remnant, mocked me every time I dared to look. The breaking point came during a frantic search for my passport. Angelica was out, and I needed to check my visa expiration date. I rummaged through the small wooden chest where we kept our important documents. Pushing aside her papers, my fingers brushed against a folded bank book I had never seen before. It wasn't mine. It was a passbook savings account, and the name on it was hers alone, Angelica Reyes. I opened it, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. The last entry, dated just 2 days after my big wire transfer, was a deposit for an amount that was almost exactly what I had sent for the bake shop. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room began to spin. It had to be a mistake, some kind of internal transfer for the construction that she just hadn't explained to me yet. I sat there in the silence, the passbook clutched in my trembling hand, rehearsing the calm, rational questions I would ask her. I would not accuse, I would simply inquire. But underneath the forced calm, a tidal wave of pure, undiluted panic was building, threatening to shatter the fragile reality I had paid for so dearly. I felt the floor giving way beneath me, the foundation of our shared dream turning to quicksand. When she walked through the door, humming a cheerful tune, the sight of her smile sent a spike of ice through my heart. I couldn't form a sentence. I just held out the passbook. The humming stopped. She looked at the book in my hand, then back at my face, and her expression didn't shift to guilt or fear. It went blank. All the warmth, all the affection that had been the center of my universe for months vanished as if a switch had been flipped. She tilted her head, a gesture of mild curiosity, as if looking at a stranger who was behaving erratically. "You went through my things," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. The world went silent. I was no longer a partner, a lover, or a king. I was just an obstacle. I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "The money, for the shop, it's all in here." She let out a soft sigh, the sound of a patient teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student for the 10th time. "Norman, there is no shop," she said, her voice clinical and detached. "I told you that you had to trust me. This was the trust. You gave me your money. That was the point." The curtain didn't just fall. It evaporated, revealing the bare, squalid stage behind it. And I was the only one left standing on it, my costume feeling cheap and ridiculous. The shift was instantaneous and brutal. Her family, who had called me Kuya Norman and treated me like a visiting king, now looked through me as if I were a ghost. Their smiles, once a source of warmth and validation, had curdled into masks of cold indifference, or worse, contempt. I was no longer the benefactor. I was the fool who had run out of money. The house I had built, every single hollow block and tin sheet paid for with my life savings, suddenly felt alien and hostile. I was a trespasser in the ruins of my own future, a shipwrecked man washed ashore, watching the tide pull the last pieces of his vessel out to sea. The next morning, it was her brother, the one whose motorcycle I had paid to fix, who delivered the final verdict. There was no shouting, no argument, just a quiet, dead-eyed statement. "You should go now," he said, pointing to my small bag of clothes. The house was theirs, the land was theirs, and my presence was now an inconvenience. I tried to argue, to appeal to Angelica, but she wouldn't even look at me. Her face was a placid lake, betraying nothing. I had no legal claim, no piece of paper with my name on it, nothing but the bitter metallic taste of my own catastrophic naivete. I was being evicted from a life I had purchased but never owned. Walking away from that house was the longest journey of my life. The neighbors, who had once greeted me with respectful nods, now watched my pathetic exit from behind their curtains. Their silence was heavier than any insult. I saw the truth in their eyes. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. I was just another broken foreigner, a walking ghost story they would tell their children. I made my way to a cheap guest house, the kind with stained sheets and a single flickering bulb, and for 2 days I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, the full weight of my ruin settling over me like a shroud. I was 73 years old, with $40 to my name. The phone call was the final humiliation. I had to swallow what was left of my pride and call my daughter Sarah. The years of angry silence between us dissolved in the face of my desperate, croaking voice. I didn't tell her everything. The shame was too immense. Just that I was in trouble and needed a flight home. There was a long pause on the line, a silence filled with everything we had never said to each other. Then, quietly, she said, "Okay, Dad, I'll book it for you." I wasn't a father calling his child. I was a beggar asking for alms, a failed king pleading for passage away from his conquered kingdom. Standing in the Mactan Cebu airport, the same place I had arrived full of hope, was a special kind of torture. The humid air that once felt like a warm embrace now choked me, thick with the ghosts of my own stupid dreams. No one was there waiting for me with a hand-drawn sign and a radiant smile. I was just another old tired man shuffling toward a departure gate. My shoulders stooped under the invisible weight of my total, absolute failure. I was a survivor, but I had survived with nothing, looking back at the wreckage of my life from a shore I could never leave and could never return to. If you're sitting there right now, in your own gray hallway, looking at pictures of smiling women from Cebu and thinking, my situation will be different, I am begging you to listen. I was you. I was the king of different. Let me ask you something. Has she had a small emergency yet? A sick mother, a brother's broken motorcycle, a tuition fee. I know it feels like you're being a hero, but you're not. You're activating an ATM. You are signaling that the machine is on and ready for withdrawals. The love feels real, but your primary function is financial. That is not cynicism. It is the brutal transactional truth that I paid for with my entire life. Let's talk about the big dream, the Our Future investment, the bake shop, the pig farm, the house you will build for her on land that can never be yours. They will tell you it is a test of trust to put the deed in her name. It is not a test. It is the end game. You are building a beautiful house on a foundation of legal sand, a castle that will be washed away the moment your money runs out. I poured my life savings into our business, a dream so beautiful I refused to see it was a one-way transfer into an account I could never touch. That signature wasn't an act of love. It was my financial suicide note. So now I am what you see before you, a ghost of a man, a story you watch on a screen. My ruin is a lighthouse built on the rocks of my own shipwreck, and my only purpose now is to flash a warning across the water to men like you. Do not become me. Keep your finances separate. Your security is your only true friend. Rent, do not buy. Help, but do not provide. If you remember nothing else, remember this. The moment you prove you're willing to pay for the dream, you've guaranteed you will lose everything the second you can no longer afford to.